All right. Hey everyone, welcome to today's session on how to take customers from closed one to successfully kicked off. Thank you so much for joining us. Okay, so today we are going to get into a sort of live walkthrough of how to think about before, during, and after your kickoff calls. We're going to talk about how to schedule, plan, prep for that kickoff, and then during that kickoff, how to put together an agenda that gets everybody aligned and set up for success in the rest of onboarding and sort of ongoing in their customer journey. And then what to do after. So when you follow up, how do you start building momentum? How do you drive the next action that's actually going to get them to the result that they want? And at the end of this, we'll have plenty of time for questions as well. And at the end, we'll make sure that we'll send you out the recording along with some templates and cheat sheets to improve your own kickoff calls as well. So let's get into it. I'm Stuart Volcom. I run growth at Arrows. Arrows is a onboarding tool for HubSpot, where essentially you have a collaborative onboarding plan that allows you to get everybody on the same page as to what's next and what they need to do to be successful with your product, all while keeping your team and all of your customer data inside of HubSpot. I'm super excited to be joined by our head of customer success, Shrel Nariman, who previously ran onboarding and built and scaled programs at places like Booking.com and Sprout Social. Hey, Shrel.
Bad time to take a sip of coffee, but hey, good to see you. Thanks everyone for joining too. Love everyone's interest on this topic, and also just generally trying to improve this whole process because it is the foundation for better customer experiences, and I think ultimately that's what we're all striving for.
Yeah, this one's going to be a lot of fun. I think this is one that a lot of people can hopefully relate to in terms of the topic, and we're going to get into some really sort of tactical stuff. So let's get into it. So the first thing, one thing to mention as we're sort of kicking this off, we are going to have time for questions at the end. But as we go, if you have questions, if you think of anything that you would like to see us cover, make sure you drop it in the chat in LinkedIn as well, or in the comments in LinkedIn, and we will do our best to get to that. Maybe as we're going, or if not, we'll certainly have time at the end. So why are we talking about kickoff calls and the importance of taking that customer on that sort of journey at the very start of their journey, from closed one, where they're so excited to be signed up and ready to get started with your product, to the point where they're actually kicked off, sort of over that hump of, what do I do next? What's actually going to happen once I buy this product? What do I need to do? Is everything going to work out the way that I expect it? And all too often we hear this sort of sentiment from folks that everybody's excited at the start, and then there's just this big gap between the expectations that they have and the reality of getting up and running and being successful. And we sort of see folks or customers fall into this sort of onboarding pit of despair. They start ghosting, they become unengaged, they don't get going as quickly as we would expect, or as quickly as we would like them to. So how do we avoid that and start building momentum from day one by sort of taking lots of little steps, continuing to build one step on top of another, and ultimately get customers to where they want to go with our products? So as I mentioned right at the top, we're going to sort of break this down into before, during, and after. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is, what do you do before a kickoff call? So once a customer is closed one, maybe before a customer is closed one, how do you start preparing for that initial kickoff and that sort of first step in the post-sale journey? So I'm going to hand it over to Shrel in just a second. He's going to sort of walk through some really tactical sort of how we do this type stuff. But before we get there, I have one question that I would love to hear your answer to in the comments. And that is, because we'll talk about this in just a second, or Shrel will talk about this in just a second. Do you assign pre-work to customers before your kickoff calls? And if you can just drop a number, so 1, 2, or 3, in the comments if you want to include, if you are assigning pre-work, if you want to include what that is. We'll certainly we'd love to hear sort of the breakdown of how folks are doing that today, and we'll have some sort of tips and tricks for why pre-work might be a good idea and how to actually accomplish that. But with that said, I will hand it over to Sherelle to sort of talk about that before stage of kickoff call. Sherelle.
Thanks, Stuart. Maybe I'll share a screen for this. But ultimately, what you're hoping to do before this kickoff call is to make sure expectations are understood, and that's for both sides, right? Because what we all do is advertise in our marketing channels how great the product or service is that we're about to purchase, how potentially easy it is to deploy, how fast it is to set up, how your life is going to be drastically different once you purchase this thing. Then sales comes along, and it's usually a pretty tight relationship. You are going back and forth, you're exchanging emails, you're getting on a bunch of calls, i.e. you're building relationship and building rapport and really starting to lay the foundation for a good first impression. And then to the chart you showed, you don't want people falling off of that and getting stuck and thinking, what happened? I just was treated like royalty and was taken through this process, and now I'm left kind of on my own. So setting those expectations before that kickoff call is critical. And there's a lot of behind the scenes, and I say this all the time I say this about our own business and to our customers. Nobody cares what you're doing in your CRM or in those handoffs or in those exchanges in Slack. They just need to know what is expected of them and what is coming up next and how to go do that thing. And so regardless of how much is happening back there, your goal is to make that process as seamless for the customers. So I'm going to share, let me share this screen, and we'll probably touch again on this on the slides in a second here. But a really good way to make sure that before the handoff is smooth is a welcome or an introduction email. In an ideal world, this is coming from usually that sales rep or whoever's working with that customer, and they're potentially introducing. And this obviously depends on your business and your structure, whether you have dedicated onboarding teams or dedicated customer success teams or account management teams. But ultimately introducing who you are going to work with next. Now that we have signed the deal, we have agreed to the terms, who is my point of contact going forward? Because I am going to have questions, I am going to have concerns, I am going to have potentially misset expectations that might need to be realigned. And really what I'm trying to do is get you to come to that kickoff call so that we have an opportunity to reset all those expectations, reconfirm all your goals, make sure that you understand the plan ahead of you. So an introduction email to that whole process is a great way to go about this. Here's a version that we actually use at Arrows, something similar to this. But basically what we're trying to say is, hey, so-and-so, I'm the new person you're going to be working with. Here is what you can expect from me in the coming days. We at Arrows always say onboarding never ends. That's kind of the mantra we live by because it is so critical in the life cycle. And there are always going to be new onboardees or new features that you're going to talk about, or new upgrades, new add-ons, all those things. And customers still need clear expectations. So they want to know it is 4 calls. They want to know it is 30 days. They want to know all those steps in between. So really what we're trying to say here is we have an onboarding plan for you. It's going to contain a handful of things in there, but ultimately what it is a bunch of tasks that we both need to complete. It is automated reminders to make sure that once that momentum starts, it keeps going. And it's a place where we can communicate. So I'm emphasizing to a customer what they can expect coming up next. And then also there's 2 really subtle but key components in an email like this. Why is the big thing here? Like, why should I show up to this kickoff call? Why should I do my homework you're assigning me? Why should I do the pre-work that Stuart is referring to? Every single one of those things should be because it is one step closer to hitting your actual goals and your problems being solved with that product or service. So all this email is saying is we're going to do that. Here's a link to a plan that we're going to jump into. If you get stuck along the way, let me know and I will be your point of contact going forward. Does this work every single time? No, customers might still reach out to the sales rep or to the person they knew. Then it's that internal process of making sure you redirect them back to their main point of contact, because that's the next step kind of in that journey. So the takeaway there, what's critical before the call is to let people know why the call is going to happen, how to go about scheduling it or getting to it. I'm going to show this in a plan in a second here. And then what they can expect once they actually show up to that call. and we'll touch on a little deeper of agenda and so on in a second.
Yeah. At what point would you recommend, sending this email? Are you sending this before the deal or before the deal is officially closed won? Are you introducing onboarding or introducing the idea of what's going to happen in onboarding? At that point, are you sending this immediately when the deal is closed? You automate this? Like, what's the process or the trigger for actually sending this email?
Yeah. We have an automated trigger that does this when a deal hits closed won. So once that deal actually makes it to that stage where we know they have agreed and paid their invoice or have agreed to pay their invoice and we want to get going with them, this gets automated. It gets sent from the onboarding rep, me or the team in that case. So we are definitely doing it before that deal technically moves its way into onboarding. In an ideal world, you can also have not an ideal world, but depending on your process and your system, you can also have the sales rep do it during sales. Like I've seen this be, I'll say dangled as a carrot, but really dangled as a carrot as to the value that you're going to get in addition to the product and service itself. It's the actual support and getting up and going and the implementation process. And so when done well, it can be a huge value add to the sales process. So it can be introduced sooner and sooner in that case, because again, it's all about expectation setting. I get asked very often, should I reduce the number of tasks in onboarding, or should I make it easier for customers to get through this phase of tasks or phase of steps? No, if those are critical tasks to the process, they have to happen. What's more important is letting a customer know that there are about to be 50 critical tasks coming up, because it is also validating the price they're paying for, the complexity they're paying for, the problems that are actually going to get solved by doing those things. So never shy away from the number of tasks. Just make sure the tasks themselves are actually aligned to the customer's outcomes, to the goals they're setting. And that's, again, a big part of getting customers to that kickoff call, is to get them to confirm those things, to make sure that by the end of that call, both of you are on the same exact page as to what the customer is really trying to do. And then here are the steps that we're going to get to getting there. So short answer, it's automated once a deal hits closed won and we want to get that ball rolling. A better answer is the sooner that can be introduced as a customer gets close to being an actual customer, or as a prospect gets close to being a customer. I think the better for that experience, because again, both parties are on that aligned page.
Yeah, totally. And so when that's happening, when you sort of have this email that's sent, that's introducing to the customer, what is going to happen next, laying out sort of how things are going to move forward. What are you doing and what are your teams doing as sort of on the internal side? Like, how are you preparing to, you haven't got this, you haven't got to the point of having this call yet, but how are you preparing for that call? You know it's going to happen. What's sort of the prep that you're working on internally?
Yeah, I'm going to jump into an onboarding plan here. I'm showing an Arrow's onboarding plan, which is the product that Arrow sells itself. And part of this is exactly that. It's communicating all those steps, both internally and externally to customers. So in that question you're referencing, what I'm doing internally is a checklist of prep items that I'm doing. Usually I have a sense that a customer is getting towards closed won, because we also are looking at sales pipelines and seeing those deals kind of progress through there. And I have a sense and automations in HubSpot that tell me, hey, this customer is getting closer to onboarding. When they hit that closed won stage, in addition to the email sending, we also have internal tasks that get created for myself and the team that say, hey, Sherelle, so-and-so customer is ready for onboarding. Here's a list of things to go do. I also have that checklist duplicated inside of my Arrows plan. So what we're looking here is at a customer-facing plan. These are the steps that once they access this ecosystem, and this is linked directly in that welcome email, they basically get a sense of everything that's about to come. And I'm only showing them the first few phases or the first few steps. The other thing I have in here is an internal task. So if I jump in here, I have a kickoff checklist. And this is obviously going to be specific to your business or your needs, but I try to generalize this as much as possible for some high level things one can do, because really the reason of why one would do this is so you can have a more meaningful and strategic conversation with your customer when they show up. Time is critical, right? And we know how valuable it is to everybody. If you have 45 minutes of someone's time booked, in an ideal world, you're coming prepared to that. You have a sense of who they are. You already have a decent sense of what their business is. And so some things that we run through is making sure that we watch all the highlight clips for a demo that's happened. We're using recording tools that we can capture that information in, and then obviously clip it and link that in HubSpot or link that in their profile so we can quickly get to those things. Sales notes. We know sales notes is a hot topic everywhere. Every CRM has a sales notes field. Usually it gets filled out. Sometimes it doesn't get fully filled out, but the whole point is to check that to, again, have as much insight as possible whenever you can. The best bit of advice I can give you on these calls is to confirm things instead of having to make customers repeat themselves. So even if you lead with, I heard your goals are ABC, great. If you get those wrong, it is still better than asking them again for a question that they've already answered, because what they'll at least do is reconfirm what their goals are. And then you can say, great, got these new set of goals. Or maybe a couple things changed between that sales closing and now that kickoff call starting. So really what you're trying to do is confirm and get people to give you more information without necessarily having to make them repeat themselves. So reading any of notes is great tactic. I always like to scour that business's website. Specifically if there's any PR news around them recently. It's a great kickoff thing to introduce or have a little conversation with, instead of the generic, how's the weather in your city icebreaker. You can hit them with the, oh, I read that you did so-and-so and this article wrote about it, or you had a new round of funding, or you all had a strategic partnership. That's awesome. Tell me more about that. Makes customers feel very, very important and very special. And then if you have things like account access that needs to be verified, and in this example, I'm using an Aero specific one too, of actually creating this plan for them so that they have an onboarding plan that's ready to go by the time they get started. And then lastly, in that checklist for us is sending that welcome email. So this is what I referenced earlier. Nobody cares if me and Stuart have 50 items in here or 5 items in here. It's also why I'm not exposing it in the plan. I'm just letting myself and my team know these are a couple things we need to go take care of. And then as I make progress on these, I'm marking them off and letting whoever else is looking at this plan also know that I've done my bits, or myself that I've done my bits, and I need to come back and really wrap this up. So whatever version of those steps are internally for you, document them, highlight them, make sure that everyone knows what they are. You cannot optimize a process or make it better or improve it unless you're actually documenting things. And so really this checklist is intended to keep, again, us on track to those timelines that we have committed to customers. So if we told them we're going to get you live in 4 weeks, I better have everything checked off on my side. So by the time it gets to them, they are up and running and actually using that time for those strategic goal related conversations.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one thing that is interesting, we'll touch on certainly in the sort of during phase is, reconfirming and sort of verifying those goals, almost sort of doing deeper discovery, or sort of your own discovery to really make sure you're understanding what the outcomes are. And I think especially as I'm sure we found, I'm sure everybody who's running onboarding implementation sees from time to time that the people who maybe bought the product aren't always the same people who are going to be working with you during onboarding, and making sure, especially on a kickoff call where you potentially have sort of a broader range of people, making sure that everybody is on the same page as to what the expectations are around and what the goals are that you're actually going to be working towards. So I think the final piece to sort of touch on before we get into during here is sort of actually scheduling that call. Like, what are you setting up in terms of how that gets scheduled? How long should a kickoff call be? Like, what is the sort of the method that you're using for actually getting that on the calendar and booked? Obviously a lot of folks have that as a metric, like how quickly are we booking a kickoff call after a deal is closed? Like, how do you make sure that that is actually happening quickly and that everything is sort of in line before that actually happens?
Yeah, great question. Generally in any sort of plan that I'm putting in front of people, I want to make some of those first few tasks easier to accomplish so that a customer is able to go do them and feel some of that momentum, both physically and psychologically, that progress is being made. So I like having that kickoff call as one of the tasks in my plan itself. What's nice about inside of Arrows is I can actually just embed the scheduling page directly in here. So this is a HubSpot scheduling page. This also works with Calendly and other calendar scheduling tools. But what I'm trying to do is reduce the number of places a customer has to go to actually accomplish this task. So everything is in one plan, The other thing I'm doing in here is clearly saying this is the responsibility of, in this case, my point person, Sam. I want it to happen within 2 days of this plan being created or shared. And I want you to clearly know what we are going to cover in this call. You mentioned timing. I don't know if there's a sweet spot for how long kickoff calls should be or shouldn't be. I've tried 30 minutes. I've tried an hour. I've kind of landed on this 45-minute world because it buys me a little bit of a buffer if things do go over, or if I end the call at that time, I have 15 minutes before the next call to actually update my notes to make sure goals are all written down and confirmed in HubSpot and so on. The anatomy of any task that you're putting in front of somebody should explain the who, what, when, where, and why. So the who and the when is confirmed by the appointee here and the time. The what and the why that's going to happen is in this agenda. Having an agenda is critical for a number of reasons, but my main reasons are you want to keep these calls on track. I am very guilty of being the one who talks a lot and will run that introduction for 20 minutes and will talk to you about any and everything. So this is as much to hold myself accountable as it is to hold customers accountable and to set expectations. And yes, you might go a little bit over, you might stay a little under, but the point is having that structure, again, tells customers exactly what they can expect. And when I have laid it out this way in front of people, they are actually cognizant of it and they'll be like, we know we only have 5 minutes to get to the next thing. We want to be respectful of your time and our time. And so that whole goal of this is to keep momentum going, right? And so an agenda is important because it conveys what's going to happen. Having this in here, I can come in here and book my time. This all gets pre-filled for you in arrows. And if I hit confirm, now that task is marked as done. So again, that customer knows they took an action. They know the momentum's there. It tells them when it's been confirmed. And now they know what to expect when they show up there. So I'll show this in a second, but when it comes time for me to ask them to reconfirm their goals, they'll know why, because we're going to talk about it in the kickoff. When we ask them to come prepared with their, in our case, onboarding process, in your case, whatever pain it is you're solving for, they know why. We are going to spend some time discussing it. So again, having this kind of agendas is great for that reason. And then the 5 kind of things I like to cover usually in an agenda is, you mentioned this earlier, who are the stakeholders? Usually the person buying the thing is on that call. Sometimes they're not, but they usually bring other people who might be actually the end users of the product. So who are those stakeholders? How do we all know who each other is and who each other's points of contacts are? Again, what are those goals? You said your goals were ABC. That's what I heard. That's what I read. Is that still true? Has anything changed in that? Yes or no? Great. I'll show you in a second where we can capture some of that. Let's review your current process. What is the current pain situation you're in? What is the current job you're trying to solve? And then let's talk about how we're going to actually solve that thing with the product. That should be the majority of the conversation. And then lastly, super, super important, next steps. And that is as simple as getting them to commit to next steps. Scheduling that next call on this call is ideal. Every time I end a call, I'm trying to get them to book another call ahead of a week or 2 weeks. And what I really do is give homework between that time. So again, why? Why should you show up to that next call? It's because you're going to do a bunch of stuff until then, and we're going to review it together. And why should I schedule it now? So that you already know it's there and it holds you accountable. And what, again, that does psychologically for people, I get this all the time, where people will at least proactively email me and say, hey, I can't come to this call because I didn't do my homework and I'm committing to do it in the next X days. Does that still suck? Yes, you never want to get a call rescheduled, but at least you're not getting ghosted and you know why it's being rescheduled and you have a little bit more rapport and trust in that relationship. So I rambled a lot there, but this is a very, very important topic and it seems subtle, but making sure this agenda is known ahead of the call will increase the likelihood that those calls focus on those topics, i.e. the actual strategy, the actual goals, the actual pains that that customer is feeling. And an agenda should be almost 100% about your customer. I know there's probably some things you're doing selfishly in that process to make sure your things are squared away internally, but it should be mostly focused on your customers and their pains and their ultimate goals.
Yeah, and I think one of the things to note here too is that you mentioned homework a couple of times there. That having that agenda laid out makes it it's sort of the why behind any sort of pre-task. If you're assigning, you have a form you need them to fill in, you have a file that you need to upload. Like, if you're going to talk about a data migration or how you're going to use this data that you're bringing over from from a previous product in the new product, it makes it much easier in the task or in the step where you're asking for that data, for that CSV upload, whatever it is.
Yep.
Hey, we're going to talk about it on this next call that's on, you want to book on Friday. You need to make sure that you've done this before so that we can have a productive conversation about that
Right.
at that point.
So that's a good point, because if I show you this customer facing view of this, you can see here what we're doing is asking them to describe their current goals. And this is actually something that can also be done in sales, and we can have a sales rep come in here and fill this out along with them. But if they don't, they're getting this plan ahead of scheduling that kickoff call. So if you're going in order here, you're going to see me asking you about your current goals. If you happen to get ahead, you're going to see why I'm asking you about your current goals, because we're going to spend time actually confirming them together here. So that's re-emphasizing that why. And then if I look at another internal task I actually have layered in here, it is similar to this exact one, but this is now me submitting an answer in here. And the reason this is set up this way is because these answers get synced directly into HubSpot. So now on that deal record, all those goals will live. And so the sales rep has that view, the marketing team has a view, all future success reps have a view into this. So what I'm doing is getting you to tell me your goals initially, whether that's through our sales rep or yourself. Then I'm saying we're going to talk about it in our kickoff call. And then I have another internal task here where if I heard something new, if I heard something different, if I heard something misset, I will recapture those goals, because again, this is my now talking point for that next template review call we do, or the next account review call we do. And again, I can lead with, so are these still your goals? Great, let's keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this is sort of the critical point. Every time you document something, there was a good question about, what happens if your checklist keeps changing as you grow? What happens as your process shifts? As you're documenting these things, you'll start to identify patterns, right? Like, what are the goals of customers who are successful during onboarding? What are the goals of customers who move quicker than others? How do we adjust the process to better serve a customer with this specific goal versus that specific goal? Right. So it's totally okay if the checklist probably should change if you're looking at the data, learning from every time that you run the process. But it's okay. You just create a new version of the process, whether that's an update to the existing one or an entirely different segment. You may find that there are some segments of customers that are just not well served by your current process, and they need an entirely different one or a branching in that process. But the more you can document these things, the easier time you're going to have making those changes based on what customers are trying to do versus just sort of what you're trying to do or what new features are coming out in your product, which ultimately should be aligning with customer goals. Anyway.
Right. But that's why the whole mantra of onboarding never ends too. That is what you're describing is exactly it. You will change your checklists. You will change your agendas. You will change the things you talk about inside of your onboarding. You'll likely have different segments of onboarding over time or implementation because your product is growing and your features are you're adding migrations and different integrations and tools. So if you lead with this idea that it never ends, it does two things. It builds that mantra internally that, yes, we have to likely prepare for some of these changes. And what it does for me, it actually helps me not try to craft the perfect template or the perfect process or the perfect agenda every single time, because I know it is going to change. So what is perfect for today, for customers today? And then to your point, how do I learn from that going forward and make sure to make little tweaks and little optimizations along the way so that over time I'm constantly, I guess, revamping and improving that process.
Yeah, for sure. And I know you touched on this a fair amount already, but sort of to transition to sort of during the call itself, like you have this call scheduled, customers have done their, sort of pre-work, they have everything they need. You have the notes, you've reviewed everything, or your team has reviewed everything that you need to from sort of the previous stage in the life cycle. And I know you sort of already went through the agenda a little bit, but how are you sort of setting the stage during that call? How are you making sure that you're covering the items to the sort of depth and you're covering everything to the point that you need to in order to help customers be set up for success, make sure they know what's going to happen? Because the kickoff is sort of one step in this journey. Some folks may have an onboarding process that's one kickoff call and a couple of tasks. They might have a 6-month implementation. There's all sorts of different paths that folks could be taking through this stage. How are you sort of managing that call itself to help customers be successful?
Yeah, what I'm doing is, outside of the agenda itself, what I'm also doing is showing the rest of this plan. So I physically share my screen and show, okay, we are here in this process right now. I'm going to confirm your goals. And then there's a slew of tasks that we have to do that are coming up here. And what I'm trying to do is again, emphasize, I'm going to open these for the sake of showing. What I'm trying to do is get you on board with the fact that you have this journey ahead of you and there's all these steps and tasks ahead of you that you need to accomplish. Why? Because this will get you closer to your goals. And so what I've also done over time is iterate on all of these tasks and steps to actually make sure they align, for the most part, pretty much directly to a customer's goals. Again, there's going to be little moments. I'm not naive. There's going to be selfish moments in this where we have internal things we need to capture and document and set up. Those are also critical. They maybe just don't have to be exposed to the customer. They just need to know that doing those things gets them one step closer to their goal. And so what I'm really doing is showing this and saying, all right, between now and the next call that we already have pre-scheduled, which I have another schedule review call in here, but on that call, what I'm hoping to do is come find a time that we can already agree to and say, all right, in 2 weeks, by the way, we also have our follow-up call scheduled. In order for you to be successful on this call, what you need to do is do the step before this and make sure that piece is done. I know you're gonna show a follow-up template here soon, like an email template, but what I'm trying to do is get them bought into this idea that there will be homework, there are things that you have to do, and even if there's 100 of those things, doing them makes you more successful, makes your team more successful. So I'm really trying to paint that high level picture. And that's why I'm spending 30 minutes of that call pretty much confirming their goals and their pain point, because what I want to say at the end of that is we can solve for those things. It's going to take some work over the next 3 or 4 weeks. But if you do your bits and I do my bits and we're both working through this plan together, we will ultimately hit your goals. And I know selfishly that if someone gets stuck somewhere in this plan, I'll have visibility into where they are stuck. And then that is that whole optimization world, right? If 10 customers keep getting stuck on the same task, there's probably something wrong with my task. There's something wrong with the description. It might be in the wrong order. It might not be as aligned to the bigger outcomes or aligned goals that customers are sharing. It might be one of those selfish internal ones that I need to get done, which like I said, is fine, but it just might not belong on week 1 of a customer's journey. So really what I'm trying to emphasize is the why of why you should keep going with this, and giving customers a place and a chance to actually go do that thing. So that's where having, if I show some of these tasks, if I'm asking you to go do something, I'm going to tell you where you can go do it. I'm going to show you a video or some sort of resource that explains how to go do it and the why to go do it again. I'm a big proponent of any time a piece of content gets put out, it should explain how to do something and why to do something. How is that initial moment of teaching? Why is that repetition that hopefully when we're not around or they're 6 months in, they keep doing that thing because it is drilled into them that this is their goals that are being achieved by doing that thing over and over again. So really, I'm painting a picture of what the next few weeks look like. Now, the better you can craft that pre-work and the better you can craft that sales process and the marketing process leading them to that kickoff call, i.e. they're doing some of those setup pieces or the how-to stuff ahead of that, it makes that call that much more impactful. They're likely leaving that call with something tangible, or they're coming, even better, they're coming prepared to that call with something tangible that you can review and discuss together and then give them homework to go optimize it. And so again, every step that's a little bit closer to that goal, a customer is psychologically more inclined to go do the thing and come back to the next call and next call and next call. And I touched on this earlier, having those things pre-scheduled holds that accountability in those moments where you are not around. And so what I'm hoping happens after a good kickoff call and a good explanation is customers go do their thing and they show up to the next call and now they are prepared for that. What happens in reality is you get questions between that, you get emails where customers get stuck. Those are all individual learning moments where if I can take one of those things and do it proactively for the next customer, great. I have improved my process. I have optimized onboarding. If I can take one misset expectation and have it reset in sales going forward, great. That's one less question we have to worry about. All that means is one step closer to talking about the customer's needs instead of ultimately talking about your internal needs to get them to their needs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that I'm really curious to hear from folks who are listening to this live is, how long does your current onboarding, or how long do you expect your current onboarding process to take? I know we're talking about the kickoff call, the sort of the very early moments of this, but one, how long do you expect your process to take, and how do you measure it as done? I think this is sort of a really interesting uh, point whenever we're talking about sort of laying out expectations, setting out the plan. How do you measure sort of done or complete in this phase of your customer journey? We're going to get into some of the next steps here, but I want to ask Sherelle, I want to ask you a question here, which we got before this session, which I think is really interesting. You sort of started to touch on it there, which is, during the process of getting a customer up and running, successful with your product, if you're running a mid touch or a high touch process, you're going to have some live interaction with customers, but the vast majority of the time during that process, you're not in the room with customers. So how do you sort of think about that process of making sure that they are, you're setting out the things that then they're going to need to do, the things that you're going to need to do, you're getting aligned on those things being the correct tasks, the correct work to get to the goal. But how do you help sort of enable them? How do you think about enabling them when you're not on those calls?
Oh man, that's the $1 million question. If you can solve for that, you're actually helping customers get momentum and go through faster, right? I think there's so much that goes into that. A big part of it is what we're talking about here, obviously, is setting expectations, explaining to customers why they should do certain things. Timelines are critical, even though I'm the one that says onboarding never ends. I'm also the one that says it should have an end date and it should have a target date of when it should be completed by. Every task should have a due date on when it should be completed by. Some of those are arbitrary, or you're making them up as you go. Probably if you're building out onboarding initially, you have no idea how long it's going to take or what the goals are. Pick a number and then use that as a benchmark going forward. 30 days is a generic number. I see everyone say our onboarding takes 30 days. My onboarding takes 30 days. It used to be 60 days. Sometimes it's 20 days. But customers like having an expectation, and then you have that benchmark now to measure against, right? So in HubSpot, I also have a bunch of data coming in from my onboarding plans and also from my pipelines that tells me customers have been in this stage for X amount of days. Customers have been in this stage for X amount of days. It took this long generally to go from start to finish. Finish being whatever you define as onboarding completed. Also critical to remember there, customer goals, right? Like we all have our own goals and our own metrics and our own KPIs. We want to get customers through. We have to onboard X new customers a month. We have to complete X number of activities and calls every week. Yes, those are all also important. They should drive customers to those outcomes. And if they're not, that's an opportunity to kind of review that internal process. So making this all rolls back up to capturing goals as soon as possible, so that then you can craft this agenda around that world, and then getting customers to go through it and actually see those moments. For me, every phase in a plan or inside of a deal stage or pipeline has an outcome that is driving it's driving customers towards, and those outcomes are aligned to what they need to do in that moment to be successful. So if I use Arrows as an example, Arrows is a mutual action plan product. We have templates in there where you can craft your process and then make duplicates of those templates, i.e. plans, and put those in front of people. You have to create a template before you can share a plan with the customer. So my first goal is to get you to create a template. But why do you care about creating a template? Because that's the scalable version of your onboarding process going forward. That's what's going to make your teams more efficient. That's what's going to make your customers get their plan more quickly. So if I can explain to you that why and get you to go do the action, now I know you have made it to this milestone and you've created a template. Does that mean you know you're a template expert? No. Does that mean you have finished onboarding? No. But you have reached a moment in that time that I know puts you one step closer to your ultimate goal, which is putting that first plan in front of the customer. So how do I get you there? And then from there, how do I entice you enough to keep going so that you use multiple plans? And now we're getting into scaling and data and having better visibility and sharing all that progress with the rest of our organization. The closer you are to sending that plan, the closer you are to those reports and dashboards being enriched with onboarding data. The closer you are to having that report, you can send to your VP of success at the end of the week and say, this is all the onboarding progress that happened this week. So in your worlds, what are those end states that get me close to solving my first pain point? You're not going to solve every single thing in onboarding, but how do I get you to solve one thing and then build on that and make it repetitive? And that's that whole why piece, right? Like, how do you do this over and over and over again so that you are achieving your goals over and over and over again? That all comes down to laying this out, laying out the structure, playing with start dates and stop dates, playing with due dates, and also being realistic. If you're putting a form in front of somebody that has 100 inputs and you're asking them to fill out all that information, sure, it might be absolutely necessary, but expecting them to do it in a day or a 2-day turnaround is maybe unrealistic. And now you're putting too much pressure on that as a first step. So also that goes back to being realistic with what your customer's actual goals are. I know you need that form filled out on day one, but if someone can't fill that form out on day one, how do you break that up? Is there information in there that you have to get today? Can some of the rest come later? So it's changing little things like that and unpacking little things like that ultimately get customers closer to making planned progress. And once that progress starts, I keep referencing to that human adult learning and psychology, but once that momentum builds, which is why you see on these tasks the celebratory moment that happens, which is why you see this progress bar updating, which is why the whole concept of pipelines generally exists in CRMs, because you want to see as customers are moving through. This does that same effect for your customers. They now see progress. They see where they are in the entirety of this plan. They see a little bit of pressure from the due date of when it needs to get completed by. So all of those things at the end of a kickoff call increase your likelihood that a customer goes and does those things. The other thing is, if you are expecting people to do it on their own, you need really good knowledge base articles. You need really good videos. You need really good learning management systems that can come into play. I'm very guilty of, that's a whole nother topic we can get into, but making those things small and concise and digestible is important so that they're actually something a customer can go do on their own. And then lastly, taking your bias out of it. We are all very guilty of this. We are all in our products and our services all the time, and something might seem very straightforward or seem very easy to us. If that's not the case, you might need to expand on that and explain to customers and take a little bit longer to actually get them to understand what is happening there. And then it's just repeating and repeating and repeating. You're not going to make all those changes in 1 week's time. That is a constant optimization of this. And over time, if you're tracking enough of this data and you're monitoring enough of these customers going through it, you're going to see that progress. You're going to see customers doing their homework. You're going to be assigning the right homework at the right time in their journey to them. You're going to be putting the right resources in front of them at the right time. And that all compounds, and you'll have a whole nother set of problems as you roll this out to the next segment of customers or the next feature you're adding. And then you just repeat and repeat and repeat.
For sure. And I think that one thing that's really interesting, especially as you're talking about, what are you trying to do in each segment or each sort of stage of the journey is, how do you not just increase the number of things that go there, but how do you reduce the scope of what you're asking to make sure that it aligns very specifically? And this is why understanding where customers are actually trying to get to, what are their goals, is so important. Is how do you make it so specific to the thing that they're trying to actually achieve that you don't need, all these tasks right now, all this work right now. You can just stay focused on the first thing that they need to do to make progress towards that very specific goal. So I'm going to just jump into sort of the next or the final stage of this. So what do you do after a kickoff call? Relatively easy in comparison to, or relatively sort of short in comparison to before and during a call. Sherelle sort of already laid out, you have the plan and you're showing that having that overall plan that you can show a customer helps set expectations, helps align on who is going to do which work, what is the work that we need to be doing. But how do you make sure that once you leave the call, once you're not live in the room or live on Zoom together, how do you make sure that the next things actually happen? And more importantly, how do you make sure that you're building alignment at your customer that this work actually should happen at all, right? Somebody, depending on your specific business, your sales cycle, all these kinds of things, somebody approved or was bought in enough to pay for this product, but they need to get up and running. They need to start seeing value. They need to get to the point where they're excited and receiving the expectations are actually being met. and they don't have, don't fall into that sort of buyer's remorse and, lose momentum, lose the excitement that they had at the very first stage. So one really good way to do that is in your sort of post kickoff follow-up is to try to accomplish two things. One is to recap, make sure that you're hearing, or that your customer feels that you are hearing the goals that they have. This is especially helpful if not everybody could make the kickoff call. Maybe there's an executive who wasn't able to join live but wants to know that the things that were discussed actually align with the reason they signed off on the product in the first place. So the first part of this email is sort of outlining what is the team, what is your customer working on? What is the reason that they bought the product in the first place? And two, what is the specific goal that they had that you talked about on the call, that you sort of aligned on, that is ideally it's a measurable goal? Like how is your specific product going to help impact this bigger company initiative that they have? How do you make sure that you're sort of continuing to tell the story that was told in sales, or the narrative that was built in sales, that there's this big picture problem or pain that they're trying to solve, and this is specifically where your product fits in? And then number three, and this is sort of really the crux of what we've been talking about today, is, okay, so if we're aligned on those two things, what is the next thing that needs to happen to start making progress to actually solving that problem, to actually getting to that agreed goal that we have, that sort of measurable impact that we're hoping to have? And this is a great spot to lay out what is the next step, of course, but then the access point to get back into, if you're using a product like ours, and you have that sort of customer-facing plan where folks can go and take action, how do you make sure you get them back in to start taking action, start building that momentum as quickly as possible? And then I really like this sort of last line in this email. If you've talked about what that next task is on the call and your sort of next steps at the end of the call, you've talked about the expectation for when that next step will be completed, you can sort of restate that as a question. And restating that as a question does a couple of things. One, it lets everybody know that this is the date that we are expecting to have the next step completed by, but it also gives people the option, or the sort of entry point, to raise any reasons why that might not be the case. I'm sure I mentioned earlier about, if you lay out the agenda for your next call, and it includes reviewing some homework that has been assigned, knowing that homework hasn't been completed, that there's maybe there's a company-wide event or a company-wide offsite or something that's happening. Hopefully that came up on the kickoff, but if it didn't, this sort of gives an opportunity for the customer to raise their hand and say, okay, this might not be able to happen because of XYZ, and you can then handle the objection rather than risking feeling like or actually having the customer sort of ghost because then they weren't able to get to the task by the date that we said, when actually there was a reason, or we could have worked around that. We could have sort of talked about the implications of missing or pushing out that due date, which of course, if you have a target go live, a target date that you're trying to accomplish everything that you've agreed on by, the impact of delaying one step may have a bigger impact on that overall timeline as well. So this is one of the templates. We'll share the sort of scheduling or introduction to the kickoff template as well after the session. But one of the things to note here, or one of the sort of to recap this follow-up, giving a sort of shareable, forwardable recap of what was discussed on the call and how it aligns with sort of bigger company initiatives, and then specifically what is the next thing that needs to go do in order to start making progress towards that. So with that, it's sort of, I think, Sherelle, do you have anything else on the sort of after piece of the kickoff call? So what you're sending in follow-up. Just one thing to note here, you'll see there's some variables or sort of bracketed things in here. Some of these are HubSpot things, some of these are arrows, sort of onboarding data, which you can be pulling into a template dynamically. And of course, the advantage of having it in a template is it's faster to send. You can edit it. Of course, I would not recommend automating this email, but you can certainly template things with context from what's being stored in your CRM, so that you sort of have it ready to go I can get it to customers as quickly as possible after that kickoff.
Yeah, the things I would add, I was going to touch on that too. A lot of this could be pulling in from that same onboarding plan we were just showing. This email should not be a surprise to anybody. Everything in this email should be like, oh yes, we talked about that. I know why I should go do this thing. Stuart said I should go do this thing because it's going to unlock ABC. Let me make sure to go do that thing. One thing that I've started noticing recently myself is people asking for recordings of the actual kickoff calls, which lead me to believe they are becoming more and more valuable. And so if that's something you're doing internally as well, you can link the recording in here too for reference. But I love the question in here too of, can you get that completed by X date? If yes, great. If no, let me know at least. Because again, it's all about understanding where customers are in that process, even if you aren't with them. The advantage of this, again, syncing to something like Arrows, is that target date for the next task is something we just talked about, because I showed you the plan at the end of our kickoff call. I told you what's coming up next. This should match exactly that. If this catches you off guard, or now I've jammed a few extra tasks in here that I need you to go do and they're a surprise to you, that's not good. That is not setting customer expectations well. That is that feels more bait and switchy to me than anything, even though we're out of sales at this point and the customer has signed up, but that's not a good customer experience. So what you really want to do is make sure that follow-up really just follows up. It emphasizes the things we just talked about. It makes sure there's another layer of mutual agreement kind of tied in there. And then in our case, links back into our actual plan, which is the source of truth for everything we just agreed to work on.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that that's such a great point. Like, how do you make sure that nothing is a surprise during this process, both from sales, closing a deal and then having somebody off to onboarding and making sure that the actual work that's required to get what they paid for is what they expected. How do you make sure that what's talked about on the call is actually what's going to happen post that in onboarding? And I know we've talked, the whole crux of this has been, how do you better understand what customers are trying to do and make sure that the thing that you're doing in onboarding reflects getting them towards those goals, and the kickoff being sort of the real starting point for that journey. So I know we are coming up on time here. Does anybody have questions? If anybody has questions, drop them in the chat. I know we got a couple as we're going through. Happy to dive into to anything there. One thing that I do want to mention, this is recorded. We'll send you the recording along with the checklists and templates for emails. If you have any questions, let us know. The one thing as well that's coming this week, which you should all go and check out, I guess, shameless plug. If you are interested in Arrows, the product that we've showed today, for collaborative onboarding plans for teams running on HubSpot, certainly head over to arrows.to or let us know in the chat, or shoot us a message. And I'm certainly happy to talk more about that. But we also have a new template library. I know we're sharing templates after this workshop. We also have a template library with all sorts of onboarding templates, all sorts of email templates, HubSpot workflow and report templates, which we'll be launching this week as well. If you head over to arrows.to/vault, then you'll be able to get put your name on the email list, and we'll let you know when that is live. That'll be a public library. If you have any requests for things you want to see there, let us know. But certainly trying to give as much of the process that we are running as we have, as much as it is helpful for folks. Sure. Is there anything that you want to come back to, that you want to touch on, that sort of critical, something that is a new learning, or a thing that was unexpected that you do now in kickoff calls that you didn't previously do?
That's a great question. I sometimes still do this, but I used to spend a lot of time on more advanced or future features that become unlocked once you get through onboarding, which I think I used to do it from a means of getting people excited about doing the actual things and the steps and the tasks, probably because some of those tasks were self-fulfilling and things I needed to do in my process. And it worked sometimes, but it didn't always work. And instead, what works better is why we built this whole workshop and why we are doing this is it's actually achieving your own goals that people care about, not some advanced features that I can unlock 6 months from now. Reporting is a big one. Everyone wants reports. Everyone wants dashboards. Everyone wants to schedule reports that go out. Those are all great, but talking about those on spending 10 minutes on that first kickoff call, which I used to do, talking about what that could mean for your future world is great, but there's better ways to communicate that. That's a marketing asset. That's something that can be talked in sales. That is something that I can show you on the second or third call. So really what I've trying to transform my own brain into doing on these calls is making it as much focused as on the customer as possible, making sure that I truly confirm and understand their goals. If they are a generally ICP or ideal customer profile or fit for the product we are selling, that goal or those goals they display or share will be more valuable once you get to those advanced features. So I know that that's going to be of value anyway. So why waste the customer's time talking about it when that can be something they read on the marketing side, or that can be something that's touched on in the demo. And so essentially what I've done is pulled that out and moved it later in the process and really focused that first call on, here is what you need to accomplish over the next week or so. Here is why you're going to accomplish it, because it's going to help you with your goals. There are advanced things coming. We will talk about templates, configuration, and optimization. We will talk about data syncing. We will talk about reports and all that good stuff. We just won't talk about it this second because it's kind of a moot point. You're already convinced, you're already here, you've already bought the thing. Let's get you instant value instead of talking about futuristic value, which I know will come if we get you past that instant value.
For sure. So this is a really good question I want to make sure we get to is, and I know we sort of touched on this very briefly, but what do you do when the champion who you're dealing with was not involved in the decision-making process to purchase the product, but you have to work with them during the next phase of the journey, and they aren't necessarily immediately on board, or they're not as excited as the person who bought the product?
Yep. Great question. Happens often. This is where having those goals is great, because you can say, I heard from so-and-so, these are your goals. Is that accurate? If yes, great. Then you probably are in the right place. Let me show you how that's accomplished. If that's completely off base, then it's probably a good point to have that conversation, or maybe pull that other person back in, because you're ultimately reselling at that point. So what I like to quickly do is go reconvene with my sales team and understand what happened there. I try to read any notes to make sure that I understand the bigger picture here. If needed, I will get the sales rep back in and say, let's get on a call with me, you, the initial buyer, and now this new person. We actually just had this event happen to me a few weeks ago, and we got everyone on the same call and basically reset expectations. And it wasn't, I'll call it an off-cycle call. It wasn't one that we would normally schedule in onboarding, but it felt critical to that thing. And their goals ultimately were aligned. They just had a little bit misunderstanding of how the product worked versus how it was positioned to them internally. So it was really just resetting expectations. Sometimes you find that, okay, great, we can move forward. And sometimes you find this actually is a bad fit. It's completely different than what you thought it would do, or your problems are completely different than what this can solve for. There is no sense in wasting either of our time going forward in that.
Yeah, totally. Definitely much better to find out, a weekend, a couple of days in, than 6 months down the line, when you have a much less happy customer.
Right.
Finding out that it's actually not going to do what they expect.
And if that keeps happening, that's internal feedback, right? Like, how do we get more people on that initial call? How do we learn more about goals initially? How do we make sure we have the right buyer and the right end user? That is all stuff you're hopefully learning from and not doing over and over and over again every time.
For sure. Well, I think we're about at time here. I want to thank everybody so much for joining us today. This was the first time that we've done one of these workshops live on LinkedIn. We have another one live on LinkedIn, which will be more HubSpot focused, steal this workflow. And HubSpot will have a bunch of examples, lots of sort of behind the scenes of the steal this workflow series. That'll be next Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern, so an earlier time. than today. But head over and join us for that one if you can make it. We'll also send out the recording for that one as well. But thank you so much to Sherelle. Thank you so much to everybody for joining us today. If you have any questions, if you want to learn more about Arrows, head over to arrows.to or shoot us an email, connect with us on LinkedIn. Always happy to help. Always happy to answer questions. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the week.